So today marks the start of week 2 of Denver Broncos OTAs, and I want to talk about some players to keep an eye on as we enter this next 3-day practice period. Now, the Broncos will be holding practice sessions today, the 30th, tomorrow, the 31st, and Thursday, the 1st, and then next week they'll be going at it once again for their final OTA period, June 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then the following week it is on to mandatory veteran minicamp. So things are moving very, very quickly for the Denver Broncos this offseason. And before you know it, we'll be starting to gather here in less than 2 months from now at the newly named Centura Health Training Center to watch the Denver Broncos practice with our own eyes for the first time at training camp. As of right now, the only people who are allowed into these OTA practices are members of the media who are credentialed, and even then, they're only opening that up to 1 day a week. And in case you haven't heard by now, the Broncos have enacted a very strict media policy that Sean Payton used when he was with the New Orleans Saints. Essentially, whatever happens in practice cannot be talked about live in a tweet or anything like that from any member of the media. The only time things can be talked about that happened in practice are after the media was met with and after Sean Payton had a chance to basically approve what's going to be said. And if the Broncos social media team does not like what they see from some media member, they will ask them to delete that post. That's happened to several media members to my knowledge. So this is a very different media policy, and it basically is to not allow any negative press to make its way into the Denver Broncos locker room, because that absolutely did happen last year with Nathaniel Hackett. As much as the Broncos and Russell Wilson want to say that all that outside noise was not a distraction, it's very, very obvious that it was a distraction. So, at the end of the day, I do support this new media policy, but it makes things a little bit more difficult when trying to report on what is going on in the practice field during OTAs and in turn during training camp, although it'll be a lot easier because us fans will be able to be there and see things with our own eyes. So the first player I want to keep an eye on during OTAs is Russell Wilson. Despite the new media policy, several members of the media who were there have vaguely said that Russell Wilson has, quote, looked good. Now, what looked good means, I don't know, but this is coming from members of the media that I trust. So I want Russ to continue to look good, whatever that means, throughout this OTA period. Russ obviously slimmed down this past offseason. He declined to comment officially on what his new playing weight is, but it feels like he dropped at least 10 to 15 pounds from last year. So here's hoping that'll bring back some of the twitchiness and explosiveness in his game that made him such a dynamic threat for all those years in Seattle. Another player that I really want to keep an eye on is Javonte Williams, who surprisingly was back out there practicing with the team, participating in drills last week during OTAs. I'm curious to see if the Broncos are going to continue to trot him out there, or if they want to take things a little bit slowly and not have him out there for all of these practices. We saw in video clips that were released by the Broncos that when he was doing drills, he was running and cutting, but he had a big, bulky brace on. Apparently, earlier in the practice period, when the media essentially couldn't talk about what was going on, he did not have the brace on, but he did put it on later on in the practice period, probably after being out there and testing his knee, and either it was starting to feel a little bit unstable or a little bit sore or whatever, and he had to go back to the brace. But regardless, he was going at not full speed, obviously, because nobody's going at full speed at this point in time, but he was going at a very fast pace and was moving very cleanly out there. He looked solid. He still has a long ways to go in his rehab, but that gives me more confidence than ever that Javonte Williams is going to be ready to go for week 1. And I want to see how the Broncos continue to progress him throughout OTAs and training camp and throughout veteran minicamp as well. I want to see how his recovery continues to progress and transpire and make sure that there are no setbacks or anything like that. So that's something that I'm definitely going to want to monitor during this 3-day period of OTAs as well as next week. I also want to keep an eye on some of the other players who are returning from injuries. We saw guys such as Tim Patrick, Garrett Bowles, Randy Gregory, Aaron Patrick, and a bunch of other guys who missed significant time last year. They were all out there participating in practice. It wasn't exactly divulge to what level each one of them was practicing because, again, the new media policy. But the fact that all of them were out there, and with Tim Patrick, he's already said that he's been fully cleared and he's 100% back. So Tim Patrick, we already know is good to go. And Garrett Bowles was back out there, and he didn't have any tape or anything like that on his ankle. So that was certainly good. So I think Tim Patrick and Garrett Bowles are both good to go. The other guys, we have to get a little bit more of a report on what's going on with them as we get closer and closer to training camp and we can actually see with our own two eyes what's going on. But the fact that all of these guys are back out there on the field as we go through OTAs is a really, really encouraging sign. I also want to keep an eye on the rookies, guys. Marvin Mims, Drew Sanders, JL Skinner, Riley Moss, all of those guys. I want to see how they continue to progress throughout this OTA period, and I want to see if they can take that next step forward in their very early stages of their development. We already heard when the media policy was a little bit more lax for the Broncos credentialed media that Drew Sanders was the star of rookie minicamp, and he had a pick six on Ben DiNucci. So I feel like Drew Sanders is one of those guys who could really step into a really nice role as we go throughout this rest of this offseason period. So he's one guy I definitely want to keep an eye on amongst the rookies. All right, Broncos country, I'm curious, who else do you think we should keep our eyes on during this OTA period this week and next week? Drop those comments down below. I would love to hear your thoughts as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. I would really appreciate it, guys. Those are two free and easy ways to show your support. It helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out to fellow members of Broncos country just like you and me. And until next time, guys, this has been another episode of Denver Broncos Syndicate. I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.